Okay, what information should be included in domain meeting paperwork? Cognitive and academics are being tested, but if areas are not being evaluated but have an impact on learning, such as auditory and vision, shouldn't those be noted in the paperwork under their respective categories, and along with any past diagnoses by a doctor, such as dyslexia, ADHD, sensory, and language disorder? Well, I mean, it depends on the purpose of your domain meeting, or to talk about your reevaluation. They should be, there's a couple areas to evaluate for. Okay, you have your triennial, or every 3 years. That's the minimum requirement that a school is to reevaluate to determine whether your child still qualifies for an IEP. Okay, so that's one reason. Now, there are provisions in there that if everybody in a team agrees that the child still meets the minimal requirements, then they don't necessarily have to update the evaluations. In those particular situations, they can just mutually agree that the child still meets the minimal threshold, and notate it that way. The second reason we evaluate is in order to establish good baselines or good understanding with regards to your child's present level of performance. This is what goes into developing a good IEP, understanding what goals need to be set, because we understand where your child is currently at. Okay, and therefore we need to make sure that the goals that we develop are substantial enough that the child can meet them in a reasonable fashion. We don't know that if we do not understand where the starting point is, and that's why we evaluate. That's why we use assessments. That's why we use data collection to establish a good baseline. Now, when we develop the IEP, we look at the child and all of their needs. All right, so that would be all of their educational performance needs. Depending on severity, it may include functional skills and functional needs, but it's mainly academics, communication, and social emotional development that includes behavior. These are all areas where we develop goals. And then once we develop goals, what are the services that are required to achieve those goals? And within those services, what is your child's learning style? What supplemental aids and services are required for them to accomplish that goal? What related services like speech language and OT, PT, those kind of things, behavioral services, how are those things relating over to your child's ability to meet their goals in their educational performance areas? Because they relate over to those educational performance areas. That's why having very good evaluations, thorough evaluations, and evaluations that aren't necessarily given traditionally. I mean, I see schools all the time, because it's on their shelf, they use IQ scores, cognitive or achievement tests, traditional, but yet I have a child that is largely limited communicative skills or nonverbal, and these tests bottom them out. It doesn't give us a good reflection of what they know, what they don't know. So that's where in the reevaluation aspects, or the evaluation aspects of the IDEA, it requires a public school to test according to the means of the child. What is it, or what method, what testing instrument, what approach do we use so we can get reliable results? And so it may not be what's on your shelf as a school system in order for us to establish good, reliable baselines. Back to your question then, should they be adding those things that impact the learning? Yes, they should. If they want to create a good IEP that is reasonably calculated to provide your child a free and appropriate public education, yes, those things would need to be addressed. They would need to be notated. They would need to be discussed. Along with any past diagnoses, if your child is eligible under one of the 13 categories, I think it's smart in the child profile section to put the different diagnoses on your child's IEP, but a lot of schools don't. You can, you probably should, but this is where you need to be real careful about that, because you need to sort of keep it streamlined and simple. Because if you give them too much, then it ends up clouding what it is that we're trying to accomplish, and that is keeping things simple and streamlined per the peer-reviewed, scientifically based understanding of what your child requires in order to make progress. You overload it with a bunch of different things, then what it ends up doing is convoluting the substantive aspects of what your child needs in their IEP. And I know that that might sound crazy, but there is a fine line, guys. You know, we're dealing with humans here across the board, you and the school team. So streamlining it and keeping things simple is the best pathway to a good, substantive, enveloping IEP that covers the deficit areas, establishes good baselines to provide the team an understanding of what services need to be designed, what supplemental aids and services accommodations need to be incorporated, and what services relate over to help with the educational performance areas. And that right there is the key to a good IEP.